Running a podcast is fun and some work, but the best part is getting to talk to interesting people. The hard part is being creative, about finding guests. Sometimes, however, they are right in my vicinity and I miss it. Such is the case with today's guest, who is an expert in media. Today, Dr. Tami Tomasello and I will discuss creativity, boredom, media's effects on both, and future challenges in this space. Stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. Tomasello.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. I want to start by just being more specific about your credentials. You have a Bachelor of Architecture from Virginia Technological University, which always kind of surprised me because we don't usually see the architecture to communication studies connection. So how did that happen?
It happened through a requirement as part of my architecture degree program that we have a concentration, which is similar to a minor. And a lot of architecture students actually go into film, interestingly enough.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of overlap between the two. And Virginia Tech was offering some film production courses, basic, with an individual who had actually done work out in Hollywood. And so there's a lot of design element involved in putting together a film from start to finish. And so I took that class. I enjoyed it. Then I took another advanced film production course. Now, this was back in the time when we were shooting on super 8mm film, silent. So yeah, it wasn't top of the line, but I decided at that point, well, let's go ahead and make communication the concentration. And as I took more courses in communication, theory courses, media effects, things along those lines, I found it to be a really fascinating subject area. And so, yeah, at the same time, I was working as a staff member at the university's library, and this newfangled technology came on the scene called the internet. And yeah, it just kind of opened up this whole other path of discovery and exploration. And then, yeah, I ended up going to graduate school and studying the mass media with an emphasis on the internet. And here I am today as a result of that.
Oh, okay. Let me point out, just for people listening, that she is saying communication, no S. In our discipline, we don't put an S in there.
Right.
That's a different thing. That's
right. And the plural of medium is media.
Yes.
Mediums.
Yeah. Those are people who do weird things with the seances. So after that, you went to Florida State University and earned a Master of Science in Mass Communication. And then I'm assuming pretty closely after that, a PhD in Communication Research and Theory. Okay. And you have done teaching at Florida State, both undergrad and graduate level, at Eastern Carolina, at West Virginia University in graduate, and at Dalton State, where you were an associate professor in the Department of Communication. So that shows that you were very qualified, of course, to talk about these things. We're also going to talk a little bit at the end about online education, because it's something you and I both have a lot of connection with. Me less now, because I'm not teaching anymore and don't plan to, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. So, okay. It may be interesting to people that we're going to talk about boredom and creative, because I don't think people realize that boredom is something that is studied, and that boredom is important in a certain way. So let's start by when you use the word boredom and creativity, how would you define those words?
Okay. Well, I would start by saying a lot of what I'll share, I'm going to give credit actually to Manoush Zomorodi, who wrote Bored and Brilliant. And this is a book, one of 3 books that we have studied in depth in the Mass Media and Society senior level course that I taught at Dalton State. And So boredom it can be broken up into two basic categories. There's existential boredom where, there's just nothing inspiring in your life and you're wondering what it's all about and why you're even getting up out of bed in the mornings.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the situational boredom, and that's really the kind of boredom that we focused on in the class and that Zomorodi was focusing on in her book, where we find ourselves kind of at loose ends. We're in between tasks or events, and we find ourselves not having anything to do. And there's an unpleasant sensation that occurs with that. And part of that, I think, probably comes from the fact that it's cultural for us. We live in a society that is expecting us to always be on, productive, go, go, go. And that if you aren't doing something productive, that you're lazy. And so there's this kind of negative stigma about having time on your hands. Added to that, then just the discomfort of being at loose ends. What am I going to do? And kind of that almost disorienting feeling of, well, what's next? And I think particularly for generations that are growing up now, where you have media available to you 24/7 and you carry it around with you, boredom is something that is not a frequent occurrence for them compared to, say, our generations. When we were kids, especially, wasn't much on television we didn't have cartoon networks and things like that. So I think as a child, I experienced many more episodes of boredom. And I do remember that kind of listlessness and just, what do I want to do? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. But then suddenly in the process of that, having this aha moment of, oh, I could do this, right? And so, but the thing is, culturally, we are pretty much conditioned to try to avoid unpleasant feelings, and boredom ranks up there in that, again, just kind of feeling it at loose ends, not quite sure what to do, a restlessness, an uneasiness, and then, wanting to try to find a quick fix to cure that discomfort. And of course, today it's easy. Just look at something on your phone. Very often it's social media that people go to fill in those gaps. But creativity then is, these flashes of inspiration or insight that we have. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for being creative. We often tend to think of people like Michelangelo, who do these great works of art or these, great works of science or literature. And yes, that is a form of creativity, but, just figuring out how to repurpose a paperclip for something is a form of creativity. But creativity needs time to develop. It needs space. It needs quiet and focus. And these aren't things that we really encourage ourselves to do anymore in this much, ramped up life that we live now.
Yeah, I study a lot about brain plasticity, and one thing that's, we read is that our brains have been rewired, if you will. I don't like that terminology, but by the internet, by the constant bombardment, if you will, and the fact that we have these things that can entertain us all the time. And, it's the typical, you go into a doctor's office or you're standing in line at the store, and what is everybody doing? They're on their phone. God forbid they talk to anybody, or that they just kind of, what did we do in the past? Well, we looked at the crazy magazines about the aliens, the space aliens or whatever. But even that connected us with our immediate world,
right?
And of what was there. And but even though I was not raised in that world of the constant thing, people my age have all gravitated towards that, even when we know we shouldn't. We know how it is to be the other way, but we still do it. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Well, and a lot of that is because, and the research is showing this as well, the digital devices, the apps running on the devices are all being purposely designed to habituate us to using them. And, once you form a habit, it's very, very difficult to break. And most of us now are in the habit in any kind of downtime, rather than, like you said, focusing in on the immediate environment, looking out the window, daydreaming, zoning out. Instead, we're filling those downtimes with distractions by looking at our phones apps on our phones, watching silly videos, things like that. And in doing so, then we shortchange our brain's ability to, tap into the unconscious parts of the brain that then help to give us inspiration and produce creative thoughts and works.
Yeah. There's never any space for it in a sense. Yeah.
And again, these apps and devices are designed to eliminate those spaces that historically have been ours to be creative in.
Yeah. There'll be pauses. It's okay. She'll pick them out.
Yeah, that's fine.
So why do you think we try to avoid being bored other than just the apps that are so present?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's most of us feel a sense of dis-ease, right? Uneasiness when we don't feel like, we want to do something, we don't know what to do, and we feel at loose ends. So, we're wired to try to, gravitate toward things that are pleasant and stay away from things that are unpleasant. So I think part of it is just our basic biology. But then, you layer on top of that the cultural expectation, that you work hard, that you stay busy, that any downtime is often perceived as laziness, or you're not motivated or ambitious enough, and so forth. So, I mean, I think there's a biological component to avoiding it. But then there's a social cultural component that adds on to that. And then, of course, then you have the technology that is more than happy now to step in and help you avoid ever feeling that unease again in your life.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, I really like what you said about we don't give the space for the unconscious mind to do anything, which is where the creativity comes from. Do you have anything, add to that?
Well, and again, I don't try to sell myself as, a brain expert, but my understanding from the research that I have done through, Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, Nicholas Carr's The Shallows, Marianne Wolf Reader Come Home, and so forth, is that, the unconscious mind works in images and sounds, right? And emotions. And the conscious brain is more the analytical, words, logic, things like that.
Yeah.
And there's not seamless communication between these two parts. The unconscious brain has to serve up a feeling or a thought, a feeling or an image that then the conscious brain can turn into some kind of thought, actionable thought that, you can do something with. And if you don't, there's all this noise happening in the conscious brain, then it just drowns out any of these signals from the unconscious, doesn't give it the chance. And it's a slow process. Good example that I like to use is when I misplace something, which increasingly seems to happen more often these days. And my conscious brain, I'm just racking it, where is it? Where is it? I'm trying to replay everything I can think of. And if I can't within 5 minutes locate it, then I stop and I say to my unconscious brain, okay, I need help finding this. I cannot remember. Please serve me up some kind of, image or whatever. And then I let it go. And, I'd say 8 out of 10 times it works. I'll be in the middle of doing something else, not heavily focused, and then an image will come up and go right to that place, and there's the key or the whatever item. So, I mean, I think part of it is just we need educations on how our brains work, as well as we need to be educated on how our media work, and then also how media and our brains work and don't work together. Most of us, we're born with these brains, and it's kind of assumed, like so many other things, that you just figure it out. But there's so much incredible research that if people understood more about the inner workings of their brains, could make so much, better, healthier, and happier use of our brains. And so, one of the things is just that with creativity, it needs patience, it needs time to develop, and it needs quiet. And these are just not things we have much anymore. My students in my class tell me, they've got some kind of human communication going on in their waking lives from the moment they open their eyes in the morning to when they close them at night. And then, even at night, whether they're, playing music or streaming videos in the background, this, that, and the other thing, we live in this human echo chamber. And I've always, listening to ourselves, watching ourselves, but not giving ourselves the quiet space. We need to just reflect.
Yeah. I do know that you, in one of your classes, always had the students do a fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's been really interesting because, 10, 15 years ago, I could give them a 24-hour fast and say, 24 hours, no electronic media.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can read a book, you can go to a live concert, that kind of thing. You can go see a play, but no phone, no TV, radio, whatever it is, MP3 player, whatever it was at the time, and they did it. Today, if you tried 24 hours, nobody would do it. They'd roll their eyes. Now I'm down to a 4-hour period where you can break it up into 2-hour chunks, because that's just how connected they are, that to ask them to go beyond that just really stresses them psychologically.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it had gotten down to 4 hours.
Yeah. I wouldn't go any lower than that, but most of them will take the 2-hour option and not the full 4 hours.
Do they, what is their response to that? I mean, after they do it, do they see?
The vast majority are happy they did it. And it does open their eyes to how dependent they are. I mean, there are pros and cons. I mean, obviously, especially with the internet and portable digital media, it's just made so many more things accessible to us and more convenient. And they understand that, but a lot of them do realize how much time of their lives they are spending on social media. Another that they could be doing other things with, like, practicing guitar. Learning another language. A lot of them say, I used to draw a lot, and, now I don't. I spend most of my downtime on my phone looking at social media. And so, during this fast, I picked up my watercolors again, or I picked up, my charcoals again. And it was really nice. I had so much fun. And then before I knew it, the time was up and I had accomplished things that I had not done in months or years of my life. And it was really nice. And I want to try to do more of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's hard for them when they're in school because the pressures of learning, and a lot of them work too. So it's hard for them to find that time. But then when they do have it, the pull is so strong. I was going to say something. I forgot what it was. So how do you think then, now that we're not only being inundated with just regular media, but the generative AI, how does that figure into this environment?
Well, it's going to just take everything that we've been doing and ramp it up, even more. Interestingly, I taught an emerging media senior level course this past spring at Dalton State.
Yeah.
And I had about 20 students in the class, and I was surprised at how many of them were just steadfastly against AI.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Given that, but part of it is they're being influenced by news coming out about job displacement, the ability of AI to exponentially ramp up the manufacturing of fake news. A lot of the environmental damage that is being caused by these big data centers, and lithium mining, and the amount of water they consume and electricity. So they came in with a pretty dim view of AI, and really had very little engagement with it. Of course, now it's early days. This technology is really only just getting into public view. In another 10 or even 5 years, it's going to be a much more mainstream thing. They're also aware of, and they've heard and been chastised about using AI to do their work for them and things like that. And so, at this point, they were fairly against it. But throughout the course, we studied the pros and cons of it. And then they had some hands-on work using AI as a tool, an assistant, not a replacement for them. And they could see the benefits of how, if you're starting with a project and you don't have an idea, how AI can help in the brainstorming phase. It can actually, it can assist you in being creative. But if you hand everything over to it, then no, you're not benefiting from it as a tool. It's your taskmaster kind of thing. But I think my biggest concern with AI is the conversational forms of it, where you can so easily, willingly suspend disbelief that that isn't actually a human you're communicating with.
Yeah.
And, start to substitute it for real human interaction. And, I've tried some of these upgraded conversational AIs, and it is really amazing. You do feel like you're talking with another person. But, it's kind of like the siren song. Watch out, there are rocks. You're not going to crash up against them. So, I think at this point, especially with Gen Z, kind of the jury's out with AI. I mean, they're highly skeptical of it, but they're not going to get away from it. Right. It's going to be a part of their lives from this point out, just like the internet was a part of our lives from the time it was released to now. And they'll have to learn how to come to terms with it. But again, just like we need to learn how our brains work, we need to learn how media work. We definitely need to learn the pros and cons of AI and how to use it effectively and not end up being used by it, because it could. I mean, it could take over your life if you were not paying careful attention. It's just that seductive and that good. And this is the worst version of AI at this point in time. So it's only going to get more human-like.
Yeah. Last night I was trying to, in my wonderful journey with Medicare, and I was trying to find out why my premium had gone up with my insurance company. And so the chat bot came on and says, "Can we help you?" And it couldn't. I put in a question and it didn't fit its parameters or whatever. And so I said, "Never mind, I'll call somebody." Well, I guess I'm just so skeptical. And so between the environmental stuff and the critical thinking stuff and the feeling like even if you touch it, you're feeding the beast, and how it has scraped everybody's creative writing and done stuff like that, I just don't even like to touch it. And interestingly, I have a book coming out, and my publisher I had played around with a little bit for a cover, just see what AI would come up with, because covers are real important. And so I sent them to her, but she said, "Well, I can't use anything here because of awards organizations, et cetera, don't want any use of AI on anything that's been done. And publishers don't want it either." So, it was just kind of interesting. But so she had to have somebody, actual graphic artist, create something. But I know it's there, and I sometimes want to play with it. And then other times I'm like, I'm not going to feed the beast. I'm not going to feed the beast.
Well, the thing though is that the beast is built into so many things that we're not even aware of, that, we're still feeding it. When you call and it says this call may be monitored, blah, 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 all of those audio recordings are being turned over for AI to learn from.
And
every time, or every time those security things where it says, okay, check all the boxes where you see a fire hydrant. That information too is training AI systems on visual recognition. We're not told that that's what's going on, but that's what's going on. So I think too, the lack of transparency in AI is also, feeding into these very real concerns. And certainly too, the way it affects creative artists, musicians, sculptors, potters, whatever, there is this threat that it can come up with better ideas faster. It's even, generating music, and things along those lines. And I think the thing is, we have to figure out the best way to incorporate it. And that's always a really messy, decades-long process. And, we're really at just the very beginning. So, of course, everything is just very chaotic right now.
I do feel bad for the kids who it is affecting. Well, it's affecting people who learn coding. It's affecting people's jobs. And, granted, if they're trained well, if they're educated well, they can find another direction, but made them really think, really have to reevaluate things. One of our former graduates, she put on Facebook that she graduated about COVID time, and she said that she's going to put on her resume that she graduated before AI and everything, because I did my work myself. I thought that was funny. So, okay, so what's the answer then when we come to this issue of boredom and the lack of boredom?
First is simply to become aware of the value, or reposition ourselves with respect to how we view boredom.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of thinking of it as something bad, something to be avoided, to push it away, to celebrate it for the role it plays in helping the unconscious mind serve up inspiration to the conscious mind. That being at loose ends, lean into it, and you start to realize that it's not nearly as uncomfortable as you think. Particularly when you start, looking around and seeing all the things that are going on in your environment that you hadn't been aware of because you were so focused on keeping yourself distracted doing something else. And I think is to just understand better the benefits of being bored. That downtime doesn't mean you're lazy, doesn't mean you're unambitious. But I like to liken it to a muscle, right? We want to build our muscles, or at least work them out enough to keep them strong enough to do the things we need them to do. But if you never have a rest or recovery period for those muscles, and you're constantly working them, well, they're just going to fail through fatigue. And I kind of think, that's an analogy that applies to our brains as well. If we don't give our brains that important downtime while we're awake, not just when we're sleeping, but while we're awake, then we can fatigue it. And I think the thing that was interesting in Zomorodi's book, Bored and Brilliant, is she had this experience where she worked at, I believe it was NPR. She had a show, and she sat down one day to come up with some ideas, just to brainstorm some ideas for an episode on her show. And she's like, I had nothing. And she said, it's not like I had just like this temporary block. It was like there was nothing. I had gone to the well and there was nothing in the well. And then it occurred to me, when was the last time I didn't do anything? When was the last time I was bored? And she's like, I can't remember, because she had lived in this, this ramped up, always going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and filling in her time with social media and playing, games on her phone and things like that. She really hadn't given her brain that downtime, and she felt like she just, depleted it. And it wasn't until after she had her first child, and the kid needed her to walk him a lot because he was very colicky, and walking was the only thing in the stroller that calmed him down, where she was just out in the world with nothing to do but push this baby around, that the well started to fill again. The brain was getting the respite it needed to, replenish the reserves so that creativity could happen again. And I think, for our students, it's a similar thing. Another activity they did in the mass comm class, in addition to the media fast, is then I had them record their phone screen time for a typical day, and then report how much time they were on their phone, and then what were the top 3 applications that they were using. And then they also multiplied that value by 1.5 to get an overall sense of all screen time, TV, laptop, tablet kind of thing. And most of them were averaging around 6 hours a day on their phones. And for Gen Z, the average is around 7 hours. So they were pretty close to the population average. But what really got me was that 90 to 95% of that time with the phone screen was for things like TikTok, Instagram, and so forth. And other research has shown that these are not the apps that make us happy. These are not the ones that give us, satisfaction. They don't really make us feel good. So many students use the phrase doom scrolling, right? So, we're spending our valuable time, because really, when you think about it, the only thing we have between birth and death is time. And if we're giving up 90% of that screen time to things that we don't even get enjoyment from, that's pretty that's something to pause and take stock of. Another statistic that I read too is that the typical Gen Z individual will spend around 30 years of their lives on social media.
Yeah. Well,
and that's huge.
Yeah, it is. And the thing is that we're under the impression that somehow we have control over what we see.
No. And we think we have control over, I didn't, how much time we're going to the phone. We fool ourselves and we say, I'm not using it that much. But, the tracking apps don't lie. And then you have to face that and say, because the other thing that I'm wondering is, in a 24-hour day, even if you say you're getting ideally 8 hours, those other 16 hours, if close to half of that is on the screen, and then the other 8 are really made up with things like hygiene and cooking your food and commuting and this and that. When are you having time to study?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I had,
and that's affecting your ability to learn.
Right.
To deep learn, to really learn. And so
absolutely,
it is taking a time away from that element.
Yeah. I guess it was in 22, maybe, when I was teaching perspectives, and, which is all about learning how to study and go to college and stuff like that. I just kind of casually said, well, how much time are y'all spending on your, because TikTok had just become real popular recently. And they said 3 hours a day. I said, you can't. But, another thing that's related to that is video games, because I've had usually guys that would just spend ungodly amounts of time on playing games, and one told me he spent 8 hours. And I said, you can't do that and go to college, I mean, and in my 60-some-year-old brain, that was like logical, but I could see it didn't register with.
Well, right. And I mean, I don't fault these younger generations. They're born into this.
Yeah.
And they're being taken advantage of. My stance on it was, as an educator, all I could do is try to raise their awareness.
Yeah.
And at least knowledge is power. If you know what's going on, then you can make more informed decisions. And if you choose to continue to devote 8 hours a day to social media or games, and so be it. At least it's a conscious choice.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it all gets back to the notion of just educating ourselves better. And we don't do a good job of that in our country. We don't educate ourselves well on things that really matter, such as how the media work and how in many instances we're manipulated by it.
Right. Yeah. I remember when Nicholas Carr's book came out, it was back, let me see, it would have been the early teens that it came out. And I read it, and I could see at that point how I, even as an older person, had been so affected by how my brain was just hopping all over, jumping all over, and how at that point, and this was sort of pre, phones and social media, that I was having more trouble staying on task for a long period of time, and necessary. And Marianne Wolf's book too about Read or Come Home is excellent. A little harder to read, and Nicholas Carr and some of the others are more popular reading. Hers is a little more difficult, but it just really, it just scared me when I saw what was happening, even to me at that age. So,
well, one thing that I did this past fall, it was an experiment really with the mass media and society course, was we read 3 books. Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, because that's been the foundational text for that course for forever. And it's a really excellent one to begin with. Then we read Nicholas Carr's The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. And then we wrapped up with Derek Thompson's Hitmakers, just for a little bit of, change there. But the first 2 books, Amusing Ourselves to Death and The Shallows, we came into class, we sat down, and I read aloud, and they followed along. And we did that every class period, 75 minutes, 3 days a week, because I wanted them to experience firsthand and for a prolonged period of time what it is to engage in deep reading.
Yeah.
And to their credit, they did it. And I will say the projects that they produced based on those writings were significantly better than anything in the past where I had relied on them to read outside of class because, of course, they weren't reading outside of class.
Oh, wow.
No, they were skimming and superficially processing because the brain just, when it's so overly stimulated and hopping around, it's agony to sit down and make yourself read something long. But by them knowing that each class period, when they came in, this is what was going to happen, it helped them mark out that period of time to dedicate to this kind of deep reading. And again, to their credit, they came to class week after week after week. And they understood and learned the material so much better. Now, it wasn't just a straight reading. We would pause and have places for discussion and discussing a point in a little more depth, or for them to ask questions. But yeah, it was just us and the words on the page. I had nothing on a screen, no PowerPoints. It was just us and the authors. And
neat.
I think it really, really helped them have a breakthrough in what it would be to sustain focus and to read deeply and to work deeply with that material.
Well, I'm sure you've read the articles in the higher ed, the Chronicle of Higher Ed and other places that even English professors are saying the students can't read a whole novel, and that's like, why are you even an English major then if you can't read extended literature,
But then where have they had exposure to that? I mean, social media, they're not getting it. And they might get some exposure in the K through 12 experience. I certainly hope that they are. But if the majority of their exposure to the written word is these small digestible chunks that are often accompanied with video or something along those lines, then they're really never giving their brains the chance to develop the skills that are necessary to decode long, complex passages of writing.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's
interesting.
Yeah. And so that was why we did it. And it paid off. Their work was substantially better.
Yeah, I can see that. Were they resistant at first?
I think they were incredulous.
Yeah.
And they weren't quite sure, does she really mean this? I'm like, yeah, really, I mean this. And I gave them the option. I said, would anyone like to read aloud? No, that's okay.
Yeah, a lot of them can't. A lot of them can't read out loud.
It's okay, though.
They can, but they don't want to do it in front of other people.
Right. And that was fine. And so I was happy to do it. But I went at a pace and, they were really seeing the words and hearing the words was like this double level of engagement for them. And, it wasn't just summarizing the information and glossing over it. It was word for word what the author had to say. And that was just the time that was dedicated to it. And then they didn't have to worry outside of class time because I really, we're past the point where they're going to read outside of class.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're way past that point, and I wasn't going to fight that anymore. But for them to really get the messages that these authors had, that was the tactic I took, and it paid off.
Amazing. So you did all 3 books that way?
No, just the first 2. Hitmakers is more like a pop culture.
Yeah.
And so that was more, read it and come in. And it was pretty obvious they weren't. So, I knew I was right in saying we were going to take our time and read those 2 books aloud in class because, that's what it took for them to really get it.
Yeah. Well, and they do need, especially to get Postman, because his work is so foundational, to everything in media studies. And if they're going to go on to grad school, they're probably, they may be ahead of the game, probably, for having read it. But
and the other thing is by dedicating the class time to reading it aloud like that, it also, whether they realized it or not, allowed them to experience boredom.
Yes.
In cases, and have to sit with it and figure out how to come back to the material when they had wandered off.
Yeah. So just to switch a little bit, then, since you are also an expert in online education, and you've done it for different institutions, and you are with Quality Matters and certification and do reviews and that kind of thing. If we can't really assume reading outside and every of class sessions and all that, what Does that give you less hope for online education or what?
No, I mean, we just use the theme of this talk. We have to be more creative, and how we're getting the material to the students. Something that I did in the Intro to Mass Comm class, which has been fully online for years now at the college. Something that I did is I did away with the textbook.
Mm-hmm.
Textbooks are important. They're foundational. Don't get me wrong, but students just aren't reading them.
Yeah.
And instead, I went with another book, How We Got to Now, which talks about 5 inventions that changed the world. And each one of these inventions, the invention of light, heat, sound, glass, and can't remember the other one off the top of my head, they all tie into today's mass media system in one form or another. Mm-hmm. If we hadn't invented glass, we wouldn't have fiber optic cables, we wouldn't have the internet, and we wouldn't have screens, we wouldn't have camera lenses, right?
So we wouldn't have science, actually. So
there's a whole bunch of things. And so it's written in a very engaging storytelling kind of narrative and the chapters each focused on an invention, and it helped to grab their attention when they were reading it, or they could watch, there was an alternative, they could watch the PBS video versions of it. But then the task was for them to figure out what the links were between those inventions and today's mass media system. And I think, that helped them grasp material better than just the textbook that kind of lays it all out there in fairly dry terms. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, giving them weekly applied activities where then they were engaging with one or more of the concepts that we were covering in their own lives, and then reflecting on those interactions. Mm-hmm. But I think any reading that is assigned has to be broken up into smaller, digestible chunks. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like, writing for the news. You may have a 2,000 word article, but you don't write it in 5 long paragraphs. Right. Nobody's going to read it. And you write it in 1 and 2 sentence long paragraphs with space in between, so that when you look at it, it's like, oh, that doesn't seem like that's a lot to read. So I think the form of writing is probably going to have to change, because we're changing. We're designing these technologies that in turn change us, change how we process information, change where we place our emphasis on moving images with synchronized sound over, squiggles on a screen or a page. And we've been shifting away from the written word. It's not going away. We need it. Without the written word, like you said, we don't have science. We don't have great works of literature. I mean, we need it, but we have to figure out ways of packaging it to help students get that information in a timely manner. Yeah.
That being the case, I wonder, though, I think I was talking with another friend who does a lot of online teaching, and I really feel that, and this is going to sound really negative, but during COVID, everybody who's a college teacher and, you have to do online, you've got to go online. And I don't think that we have caught up with the way it should be, though, how it should be designed well.
I'd say that's true for many colleges and universities, because again, when the internet came out, it's like with any other new thing that comes out, we just try to adapt it to what we've been doing instead of adapting what we're doing to it. And a lot of colleges, universities, schools learn the hard way. You can't just throw up all the content on a website and think it's the same as going into the classroom. There are different environments, and you have to know what the biases are of those different environments, meaning what those environments will allow you to do effectively. Because what works effectively in the classroom doesn't work effectively in the online. Right. You can, if you've got a 75-minute classroom and you're using the lecture format, you can get away with that because that's a time frame that has been dedicated to that. In an online environment where people can get up and go and do other things, throwing up a 75-minute single recording, nobody's going to watch that. You have to break it up into chunks, and you have to become much more efficient and concise with your language. So typically, I worked with scripts, so I didn't have any extraneous words. So I was trying to keep each segment of, a series of talks no longer than 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Because, generations today are used to, again, getting information chunked up in these, convenient, digestible bits that they can kind of fill in as they go through their day.
Yeah. Yeah. I just worry that there hasn't been, what we know about good design hasn't caught up with what we actually do.
Because it takes money.
And time.
Trained people on staff. They have to hold workshops. There has to be, top-down support for it. And some institutions like Florida State University, they came out of the gate hard and fast with online education, back in the 2000s. And I mean, they really went all out in making sure their faculty were appropriately trained and had this, resources that they needed. They had an had a dedicated office of distributed and distance learning, but they're a big university and they have that kind of funding. I think at the smaller colleges and school levels that, most faculty have just been pretty much left on their own to kind of figure it out. And, I just was very lucky to have been at a place where I got the QM training and then stayed on as a peer reviewer, because that taught me so much and so deeply through repeated exposure to their rubric of, what constitutes a well-designed online course for learner and instructor alike.
Yeah.
And
the thing about the QM is that it's not about the bells and whistles and the dancing girls and, things like that. It has not, and I learned early, the students didn't much care about that stuff. They wanted clarity.
Yeah, they want consistency, ease of navigation, ease of finding the information, clear instructions on how to get started, how to reach out to their instructor if they had questions, clear assignment instructions, all of those things. Clear navigation so that they weren't spending 15 minutes trying to figure out where that week's learning module was located. So it's really just getting those basics in place that, we can't be spontaneous.
No, no spontaneity.
No, I mean, there's a little bit, but it's not like you can just walk, like when you just walk into your face-to-face classroom. Okay, change of plans today. It just doesn't work in the online environment. You pretty much want as much of it in the box and ready to go at the beginning of the semester. And that's a big change too. Trying to, teach an online class on the fly doesn't work very well.
No. And I've heard things and I'm like, no, you can't do that. You can't create your module week by week. No, can't do that.
No. It stresses the students out.
So, okay. Well, I appreciate you being with me today. Do you want to share what's going on in your life? You don't have to. We can cut this part out.
Oh, I'm retired or retiring as of May 31.
Good.
So I'm very excited and in the throes of frenetically packing to move to the mountains of Western North Carolina, and looking forward to that. I mean, I've loved my time in higher education. It's been a wonderful career. I mean, it really worked out well for me, and I'll miss elements of it, but I'm ready. It's time to hand the reins over to a younger generation who I think may be more successful. You get to a certain point in your lifespan where you realize the gap between you and what is of value to younger generations has widened so much that you're having increased difficulty in knowing how to effectively reach the younger generations. And that's that's just natural. It's not a criticism. But let the younger faculty come in who have more in common, and let them figure out creative ways to reach students in the academic environment.
All right. Well, best of luck. Although moving is horrible, I hate moving. So maybe get past that part and you'll be in a lovely, cooler Western North Carolina environment. Yeah. Closer to the, I guess closer to the Smokies maybe. And
Blue Ridge, the Smokies, and most importantly to family.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Well, thank you for appearing on the show today.
Yeah, and thank you again for having me. And thank you for having been such an amazing and wonderful department head for all those years that you were for us.
I appreciate it. It was kind of an interesting experience.
I'm sure it was.
Especially the way it started was interesting, but we won't get into that. But I still sometimes I think, oh my, that was something. But yeah. Okay. Well, have a great day. And
all right.
I'll see you around.